He showed me that. He showed me all the back end.
Yeah, I've never seen this back end.
Go to the history and get the useful treatment. You gotta find that page.
So have to go. You're streaming. Why did I do this then?
I think I will.
Looks like it might be live, Patrick. Let me put up the.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, so he did all that in the background. Pretty cool. You can hear it. Oh,
Okay. Good afternoon, folks. If everyone could find themselves a seat, we're going to get started here in just a moment. Thank you. Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, and then only ever do you.
Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm Sarah Fry, librarian and library department chair. Thank you. On behalf of Emoja and the library, welcome. We are celebrating Women's History Month, and we're honored to have our guest, Miss Anita Gail Jones. But before I introduce our guest, I'd like to thank ASCOM for providing 75 copies of the book, which are right up front on the cart. Students, if you haven't picked up a free copy, please get one at the end of the program. I'm sure Miss Jones will be happy to autograph it. If you're not a student, please hold back until the students have a copy, and then if there are some left, you can go ahead and grab one. Book Passage, a wonderful independent bookstore in Corte Madera, is with us today. Everyone wave hi to Zach in the back of the room. If you'd like to purchase copies of the book, Zach will be happy to help. In a few moments, we'll welcome Anita Gail Jones. She is a visual artist, professional storyteller, and writer born and raised in Albany, Georgia, and she currently lives here in Marin County. Anita's debut novel, The Peach Seed, was a 2021 top 10 finalist in the Penn Bellwether Prize for Socially Engaged Fiction. I'm thrilled that Miss Jones is with us today to discuss this beautiful book. If you haven't read it yet, that's okay. It's a sweeping multi-generational novel showing the origins of one South Georgia family, their tradition of giving carved peach seed monkeys to all male descendants, and how its modern day sons and daughters navigate the legacies of the American Civil Rights Movement and the far-reaching impacts of the 1800 slave trade from northern Senegal to Charleston, South Carolina. And we're going to watch the trailer for the book here. We're getting this pulled up. Almost there. Here we are.
There's one simple vision hack anyone can use to improve vision, so you can say goodbye to your optometrist for good. Did you?
Okay, and now let's welcome Miss Anita Gail Jones. We'd also like to acknowledge and welcome our online audience. Everybody wave. We've got folks streaming in from YouTube. Our Emoja students and all students in the room, welcome. Members of the community, thank you for coming out to COM today. Administrators, staff, and professors, I see we have President Eldridge in the room. Nicole Cruz, Keith Rosensaul, Instructor Patty France, Instructor Sungji Smith, Instructor Colleen Myhall. If I missed anybody, I'm sorry. Counselor Early. Before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to extend an invitation to join the Feminist Literature Book Club. Sign up at the library table in the back of the room. Our first selection for spring 2024 will be The Peach Seed. You can also check out many other books celebrating women's history. We think two characters from the book, Miss Olga and Miss Altaviz Benson, would be proud. And now I'm excited to introduce our panelists. Nikisha Dyer. Nikisha was part of Nikisha was part of the very first Emoja cohort. In fact, she calls herself Emoja Patient Zero. Nikisha was also Emoja's very first student assistant. Now she's the program coordinator supporting all learning communities. Next, we have Malika Smith. Malika is a COM alumni and a former student assistant of Emoja. She's a graduate of UC Davis, and she's currently the administrative assistant of student activities and advocacy. And we have Paula Daguna. Paula is a business major. And she's a business major, and she's an Emoja peer mentor. And now I'm going to sit down and hand it off to Nikisha for the first question.
Thank you. Again, thanks everybody for being here, and a special thanks to Miss Anita Gail Jones for blessing us with your presence. We appreciate you. We're gonna get into this. So the first question that we have for you is, what motivated you to start the Peach Seed Project, and how much did you know about the plot when you started out?
Let me say thank you to the whole community for doing this, and to Dave especially for everything you've done, online and off. I really appreciate it. And the commute was perfect because I just had to drive from Novato. So I love that part of it too. So this project started with a question from my dad. Started in 2007. How old were you in 2007? I don't even want to know. Anyway, by the time I formed this question, my dad had already gone to glory, as we say. So I was on my own for an answer, and I turned to fiction for an answer. Around the same time that I asked this question, however, I read a book by James Baldwin called No Name in the Streets. And I quote his answer in the front of the book. So I won't do that here because I want you to read the book. So you can find it in the front of the book. However, the question was, my dad was born in 1921 in Southwest Georgia. So you know that he saw a lot of stuff racially, having been born in part of the greatest generation. But because of the color of his skin, he was not able to realize the promises made to that generation. So I wanted to know how he managed to be a leader in his church, in his school, in his church, in his community, certainly in his home, and on his job, everywhere except in the eyes of the US government. It had actual laws and policies that treated him less than human. So that was my question. How did he manage to be a leader? And I turned to fiction for the answer, and I created Fletcher Dukes as my person to lead me to that answer. And what was the second part of that question?
Second part of the question, how much did you know about the plot?
Oh, yes. Not a lot. I knew the beginning. I knew that pivotal scene in the Piggly Wiggly. That's probably the main thing that I knew. And I had an ending, which I'm gone. So it just changed a lot as characters came in and characters left. And my research deepened, and I decided to add other characters, things like that. But what I always knew was that there would be an ancestral story as a part of the whole narrative, and that would be mystery to me all the way through. And I was hoping that readers would be as I was as I wrote it. I wished that I could tell Fletcher and his people that I know your folks. I know where you came from. I know where this weird tradition of carving the little peach seed monkey. I know all about it. Of course, I wrote it, so yeah, I know. But yeah, I wanted to be able to tell them, but we can't because of the wall of history. I call it the wall of history. And I had hoped that readers would feel the same way. As they read the book, they would say, oh, can I just talk to y'all for a minute? I can tell you everything you don't know. So that was what I knew. And as it progressed, it changed. And I always wrote the beginning and the end in tandem. If the beginning changed, the end changed. If the ending changed, the beginning changed.
Okay, I'm the second question. Thank you for being here again. So the novel goes way back to Africa in the 1800s. How did you write about such a different time and place?
A lot of research again, and Google Maps. Pretty amazing. You take that little guy and you drop him down and you can walk around the banks of the river, Niagara River, and imagination, of course, because I was putting myself in the shoes of Malik Wele, who is the ancestral character, and reading slave narratives and historical documents and just pretty much imagining, putting myself in those shoes. And I would have to take breaks because it's very hard. It's very hard history to read about. And to just think of the horrors of it. But what I always knew about the plot, you were asking about the plot, what I always knew too is that I wanted to elevate the good as well as the horror. We know the stories, we've seen the movies, we've read the books, we know about the lynchings and the horrors of the enslavement period. And by no means was I trying to leave those out. I didn't want to forget the tender moments, beautiful moments that exist between humans and people who love each other that had to exist in order for me to be here. So I wanted to elevate those, and that was crucial to the project. But a lot of research.
Hi. How did you look after yourself spiritually and emotionally when you were writing about slavery and other types of oppression? How did you look after yourself spiritually?
Love that question. Thank you. I took breaks and I just sat with the truth and realized that to turn away from the truth is to perpetrate lies. And I was not there to do that at all. Turn away from truth is to perpetrate lies. So it would be the sort of thing where I would say, if they could live through it, then I can write about it. If they could live through it, I could write about it. And that didn't make it any easier to do because I would stop and sometimes cry and just sit with the truth and also sit with how far we have not come in this country, not facing the truth and owning it, because the whole country was built on this. And for us to still be ignoring it, got to change. Unacceptable, completely unacceptable. And I would take, as I said, I would take breaks. And I would also honor my parents and my sister who passed away in the 90s and very much a part of the journey because they were there with me in spirit. And I knew how proud they would be of this work and that I had to stick with it because it was a story that needed to be told, I felt. So it was a lot of care, a lot of loving care for myself and for the story. Love that question. Thank you for asking.
All right. So in the book, there's a tradition of the father in each generation giving his son a monkey carved out of a peach seed. Of the many traditions used to sustain us, why did you choose that one? And why peach seed instead of peach pit?
Yay, tough room. Let me talk about the peach pit thing first. I connected with a man in Michigan who has a website in fact, when you Google peach seed monkey, he comes up. He used to be the only thing that came up, one of the only things. Now, his name, what was his name? Richard, I forgot his last name. He has since passed away, but I connected with him over a 10-year period, and he was so helpful with all of the details about carving the monkey. I mean, he had a whole website on it and the history of carving pits. And he had the same argument. He said, it is not, no argument. It is not the pit. I mean, it's not the seed, it's the pit, because the seed essentially is inside the pit. You know this, right? I had to give him my argument, which was, number one, that's what my cousin who carved the one that I have called it a peach seed monkey. And I realized that the word seed conjures up growth, while pit plummets you into an abyss. So that was my literary reason for it. And I just like the way it sounds better. I mean, we like the idea of seeds. So back in the 60s, when my sister Betty and I was maybe 9 or 10, and she was 4 years older, one of our cousins from the north came down to Georgia, and he gave her and me little peach seed monkeys that he had carved. Now, if you know anything about the South, when your northern cousins come to visit, it's a big old deal, because they come bringing all of their northernness with them. And they talk funny. They say pop instead of soda and a lot of other stuff. And when they leave, you end up talking a little funny too, because you've been hanging out with them for a week. But Paul Hearns was my cousin, an elder cousin, who had worked in the steel mills in Youngstown, Ohio. He would take a peach to work. I found out from his wife many years later. And I don't know how he came to learn how to carve them. I know nothing about it because I never talked to him about it. When my sister was killed in a plane crash in 1997, we went to Ann Arbor, Michigan to clean out her apartment. And on her chest of drawers was a little music box. In that music box was a little peach seed monkey, the one that Paul had given her. The tail on mine had broken years before. I don't even know how. But Betty and I, my sister Betty and I, had never talked about these little charms, never talked to Paul about them, but here it was in her jewelry box, completely intact, even though she was gone. And it took on a definite meaning. I didn't know what the meaning was in the moment, but I just knew that it meant a lot to me, that this little monkey. And hers had rhinestones for eyes. Mine didn't. Hey, like, what's up with that, cousin Paul? So now it had the special qualities. And so that was 97. Fast forward 10 years, 2007, when I began the project, the little monkey just jumped in when I was trying to figure out, what's this going to be about? Who is this family? What's their deal? The monkey just jumped in the mix and charged me with figuring out how to make him fit. So I invented the tradition. We did not have that tradition in my family. I never met anyone who has. Maybe there is somebody out there. I'll probably meet them one day and say, that's my tradition, right? But it was a lot of fun to fit him in. And I also have a few little poems scattered around in his voice, in the monkey's voice. And I was going to wear it today, but I thought, no, better not. And I have a picture of it on my website. If you want to go there, you can see what the little monkey looks like, because it literally is just a charm, small enough to wear as a charm, and quite exquisite, the way that they have to carve these. I have not tried. I like my fingers too much, but I got a lot of information from my friend Richard that had done it before. That's the story behind the little monkey.
Okay, so Albany, Georgia, you grew up there and the book is set there. Can you tell us a little bit about Albany and growing up there?
Yes, Albany, Georgia is, population right now is 69,000. I think in 2012, when the book was set, it was 77,000, I think. Albany is, as I say on the first page, in many ways, it's the same as it was 50 years ago. It's, there's a lot of white flight. Town has historically been more black than white, and right now it's 70% black. And most of the schools are all black. Serious white flight to the northernmost county. Lee County is the first county north. And I find it amazing, really, when I go home and I see, and I wonder, where are all these white folks going? Where are they going? And I understand where the people of means go, and they can put their kids in private schools, but where do the people below the poverty line? What are they doing? This is a question I have, but growing up there in the 60s, for example, I was only 7 years old when the civil rights movement happened, the Albany movement happened, and my parents did not participate. My sister, Betty, wanted to participate. She was 12, going on 13. There were a lot of young teenagers and college students that participated in the movement, and it was very dangerous. And my parents did not allow her to participate. And being a good girl, she did not go against their wishes, but a lot of other students did. And all our lives, my sister would say, you know, that's a story that has yet to be told, the Albany movement story. And now there are many, many sources that are accounting, talking about the movement. But back in the 60s, when it was happening, I was blissfully unaware, because my parents held us in a place. They protected us from the racism and the horrible stuff that was going on just down the street, because the street I grew up on was practically it was part of the campus of Albany State College, now University, which is an HBCU in Albany. And I had a beautiful growing up on that street called Hazard Drive, but it was not hazardous, living on Hazard. It was a beautiful growing up with all Black teachers who knew how to hold us in good places and knew how to hold us accountable, who weren't afraid of us. Just had kind of a big deal with integration. There was a lot of fear in the classroom. And that, you can imagine how that plays out, students. So Albany has always been something very close to my heart. I just came back a couple of weeks ago from a trip there. And it's always evolving. They have a project going on now. There's a Harlem district in Albany, which back in the 60s was a high concentration of Black businesses. And it has fallen into ruin pretty much now. But they have a project going called the Harlem Renaissance Project, and in Albany. And I'm really excited about that because they're going to revitalize the area downtown. That was very crucial to the movement.
Can you tell us about the Students Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and how did you connect to it? Students Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
Coordinating Committee, SNCC. It was created in 1960. And as is, I think is always the case, young people were the engines running this, which we see still happening all over the world today. And the young folks in Greensboro, North Carolina, I think it was maybe February 1960, they had the Woolworth sit-ins. And that became like a fire that just sort of fueled movement across the country and other campuses. And SNCC was begun, and one of the main, as I said, the main engines driving it were students like you who were tired of racism, tired of inequalities. Same stuff we're fighting still today. So I knew that I wanted to include it in the novel for this very reason, that someone like you would be able to read about it and ask questions about it and do your own research to find out more. There's a lot of information about SNCC online and in books. But I had the great pleasure of meeting many of the foot soldiers and people that worked in the movement at the 60th anniversary of SNCC that happened on the campus of Albany State University in 2011. I went back for research earlier that year. I went in March. And while I was there, my friend Rutha Harris said, "Oh, you got to come back in June. We're having the 50th anniversary." I said, "Oh man, I wish you had told me that 2 weeks ago. I would have I would have planned my trip to be in June." So I went back and it was wonderful. It was so amazing to meet people who were had lived the lives that I was creating for these characters, be able to talk to them about their real life experiences. And they were very excited about the novel. At that point, it was still just a dream that it would be published someday. That was about 10 years before I got the publisher. So a lot of perseverance. SNCC is a really important part of it. I'm glad that. Let me ask you a question. Is that the first time you had heard of it and you read about it? Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. So would you please share a bit about your writing process with us? Your early morning, late at night, computer, some paper, outline, no outline. What is the vibe? How do we get to a whole book?
Well, I will say, first of all, I'll tell you a story of my journey, but let me say first that my process is totally irrelevant to it's a good story. We all love the stories, but don't feel like, yeah, that's going to work for me too, because you have to find your own way, your own process, no matter what you're doing. I write, it's pretty much all of the above because there's no set time for me. I do find that I like waking up kind of early to write because I can't remember what writer said this. I read it somewhere. It was a female writer. She said she liked to wake up before her critic to wake. Yeah, I said, "Oh yeah, that sounds like a nice idea." Margaret? Maybe it was Margaret. Yeah. So because that critic can be, "Can you please just go somewhere and sit down and leave me alone? I got work to do." Sometimes I write longhand in pencil, sometimes in pen, ballpoint because it's faster. Computer, yes, most times. But I like to just write on a legal pad sometimes just to get it out. I'll do a free write, actually. And it won't have anything to do with what I'm writing. It's just to write. And free writing, I highly recommend because you know about free writing? Anybody in the room? People know about it, right? You just let it go. Think of your brain, think of your writing hand as a straw, it's hollow. And all these ideas are just going to flow from your mind into the pen, and you're not really thinking about it. And it takes practice. Sometimes you may just write the same word over and over again, but do that. You're exercising the muscles, so none of it's bad. And sometimes I'll do a free write around the project too. I'll say, okay, what's Fletcher going to do? He and Bodilla got to talk about this. What might that look like? And I realize that this thing I'm writing right now is throwaway. I'm not married to it at all. Nobody ever has to see it. It's throwaway. But guess what? It might not be. But because you released yourself of its importance and its preciousness, it can become. But if you sit down with this idea, oh, I got to write this thing. This has got to be perfect. I only have like an hour to do it. It's got to be right. I don't know, that might not work out as well. So time of day just depends on, when I was doing this project, I was also a mom doing homeschooling and I had a life. So it wasn't about having the luxury of not writing when it was time to write. It's okay, sit down, bottom in the chair, work, and go. I make that sound easy, it's not. But you do it because you want to see this work happen. And you know that you're the only one who can do that. And this is the other thing. Your characters, if you're writing fiction, and your ideas, if nonfiction, you're all they have. They're counting on you to give them life. And they're going to be pissed if you don't. You're going to have to deal with that. They're going to come for you. So one of the things I do is interview my characters. Now we know I'm talking to myself, but it's an interesting exercise because once you start living with these folk, and a novel takes you over a long period, once you start living with them, they do start to talk to you. And I wrote a piece called The Waiting Room. It's an essay that's it takes this fictional place in my head called The Waiting Room. It's the place where all my characters wait to be put into stories. And they're in there arguing and trying to get in the front of the room, and you don't need to be here, and I'm trying to go over here. And it's a pretty funny place. But one of the characters, Indica from the book, Indica is Bodhi's significant other. She comes to me in the waiting room and says, "Why don't you just interview us? Because I need to get some peace in here. This place is driving me crazy. Why don't you just interview us and then you can decide who you want to put into stories?" I said, I see you. That's a good idea. I wish I had thought of it.
So this is your first book. So it must have taken a lot of persistence not to give up. Did you ever feel like giving up during the writing process? Did you ever feel like giving up while trying to get your book published? What kept you going? Multiple questions.
Process. I love process. I love working toward something. And what kept me going over the many years that it took to bring this to fruition was the fact that it kept getting better. It wasn't working for nothing. And if you stay close to the work and you keep pushing, you keep realizing what is the best next step, that's key. You get to a point where you need help. Knowing that is really important. And then asking for it is important. Because you can write and write and write, just like with painting. If you keep messing with it and messing with it, you can end up with mud on the canvas. And with writing, you can end up with something like iron, something that's too rigid and doesn't move, has no life in it and no light. So for me, it was always the fact that each step was taking me further and closer to the goal. And I was, in 2011, as I said, I went back to Georgia for a trip. But this was different for me. I always go home in the summers usually, at least once a year, just to go and visit. This trip was specifically for research. And I had not done that yet. I had thrown a lot of time at the project, but never, time is money, yes, but actual money, booking a ticket just for that. So I realized this is getting serious. You know, if you're throwing money at the project, you better be serious about it. So at that point, I knew I wanted to try the traditional route to get a publisher, an agent and a publisher. But if that did not happen by a certain time, I had decided I would self-publish. Self-publishing isn't what it used to be. There are a lot of wonderful outlets for it. And as long as you take your project through the same process that a publisher would, which means you get an editor, you work with that person, and you make sure that you've got your best foot forward, I think it's a good option. What it did for me was give myself permission to push, really get behind the project and push. So that's what I did. And I got lucky. I think it was a lot of luck. I like what James Baldwin says about talent and luck. I hope I get this quote right. He says, talent is insignificant. I know a lot of talented ruins. Beyond talent are all the usual words: love, luck, discipline, but most of all, endurance. That is my motto, endurance. You just you stay with it, something's going to happen. You stay with it and you push.
So after writing this book, which is amazing, do you have any projects coming up?
Book number 2. It was a 2-book deal with Holt. And when I was writing my query letters to agents, because that's the way the publishing world works, you have to have an agent to talk to the big publishers. They don't talk to writers, they talk to agents. I had been through this process many, many times over the 14 years that it took to have this happen. So now I'm thinking, okay, what have I learned from all of these years of rejection? And what I thought I knew is that everybody wants to know what else you have. Even if you just signed a contract, before the ink is dry, they want to know what else you've got. And I thought, okay, what else do I have? Well, there is that novel I started back in 1988 that's so old it's on floppy disks. I'm not kidding. And because I didn't bring it along with me each time I got another computer. So in my letter to agents, I said, I do have another, I don't know my exact wording, but something like, I have another manuscript in the wings. We could be talking about a 2-book deal, period. Okay, let's see how that goes. So once I got Steve Ross as my agent, that's another story. In his query letters to editors at publishing houses, his last line was, Anita is working on her 2nd book. So be careful what you wish for, maybe, I don't know. But meanwhile, my husband goes on eBay and gets a external hard drive so we can digitally chisel this manuscript off of the floppy disk. First one didn't work. He ordered another one. That one did work. And to my surprise, this manuscript that I started back in 1988, not quite that long ago, I had 300 and some pages in this manuscript that was started when I was working as a model in New York City. Very frustrated with that industry for a lot of the same reasons I'm frustrated with the book publishing industry. Not enough diversity. And I poured all of that into this crazy manuscript. It just kind of got bigger and bigger and bigger. A lot of problems with the manuscript, but it has good bones. The title is Head Rag. That's the working title anyway. So on the night before I was to have the conversation with my editor and my agent, talking about whether they were going to sign me or not, my agent told me, now she's going to ask about the 2nd book. I said, no kidding. But you don't have to go into great detail, just broad terms. So when she did ask about it, I just gave her a quick synopsis that I will tell you. On the night before she leaves home to move to New York City, this young woman, her family throws a party for her and they all give her gifts. Her name is Dracena. Dracina's grandmother gives her an old scarf that she kept in a suitcase under the bed. And this scarf was worn by grandmother's mother to pick cotton. It was worn by the grandmother to work as a domestic, same scarf. And now she's giving it to this young woman, Dracena, to take with her to New York. And she'll use it to keep her hair nice and coiffed for the runway and to keep the makeup off the expensive clothes. In time, she sees it as an heirloom, a connection to the women of her past, from cotton fields to day work, fashion shows. Well, that's what I said on the phone to the editor, and there was big silence on the phone. I'm thinking, oh no, what does that mean? And then she said, that's amazing. And the next day, the book was in the deal. And it is being worked on, yes, because it has a long way to go. But whereas this book was from the male point of view for men, the 2nd book is from a female point of view. And I can't tell you too much, but 2 characters from this book will be in that book.
The plot does thicken. All right. Well, we're going to wrap up here pretty soon. But with respect to Women's History Month and as a Black woman living in Marin County, do you have any words of wisdom, motivation, or any specific experiences that you'd like to share with the people today?
No. As you know, I grew up in the Deep South. But the only place that I was called the N-word to my face is here in Marin County. I'll let that sit with you for a minute. 2016, shouldn't surprise you. I was in Nevada driving home, and I had to stop at a traffic light. And this man in a white pickup truck wanted to go over, he wanted to move from the left to the far right and go that way. Of course, he was already there in his thinking, the far right. But he wanted to move over, and here I was stopping for the light. I'm in his way. And I'm in a convertible. So I'm very vulnerable in this moment. He yells over at me, "Come on, you dumb N-word." Now, in that moment, I'm frightened, number one, and I'm exposed. I don't know what else he's going to do. He's right there, and I'm right here. I keep my eyes ahead. I don't want his face in my head. And then when he went on about his way, I got his license plate number. I reported it to the local police. They wanted to know if he was trying to pick a fight with me. Was he provoking me in some way as he used the word? And I said, well, the word itself is provocative. It's designed that way. Yes, but he's not here to defend himself, and we don't know exactly what happened, and yada, yada. So the incident was recorded as a suspicious incident. No mention of racial slur, no mention of any of that. So that's how that went down. My muscle memory still recalls that day when I go past that light, that intersection in Nevada. I still think about that day. So I've had some encounters with some neighbors and trying to figure out what do you say when people are insulting you and they don't even know it, or they don't think they know it. So I say practice. Come up with lines, because how many of us have, it happens all the time. Boy, I wish I could have thought of what to say in that moment. Well, create these moments. Do a little fictional thing with yourself. Say, that happens to me again. Here's what I'm going to say. Know what you're going to say. Another incident involved a man who lived behind me. This was after George Floyd, and the Minneapolis Police Department was set fire. I think it was vandalized in some way. And he actually said to me, to my face, if you can say you can't breathe, you can breathe. That old line about George Floyd. And in the moment, I didn't know what to say. I felt threatened in the moment, actually. I'm thinking, this man feels it's okay to say this to a Black woman after what has happened. I need to go home. So I did. I went home, and I didn't walk that way for a long time. And then I saw him many, many months later in a store, and I faced him again on it. And I told him how uncomfortable I was and how that just did not sit well with me. It was unacceptable. And he sort of remembered the day, and nothing really happened. But I think that Marin County is a place where you can almost forget. But don't forget. Don't ever forget, because it will hit you when you least expect it. And I was just reading this morning some article saying what to do when you're insulted, some tips on what to say when you're insulted. And my favorite was, ooh, you need to come with a warning label. Back up, and I always try to think about what's the best way to diffuse the situation. My father was very good at this. And I think it's something that Black men learned how to do in the South. And he was very good at it. Not to say it's the right way to be all the time, but if it can work for you, use that. But just don't forget that racism is everywhere, all the time. And it's just raining down on us, even when we don't know it. And you might get a wake-up call. That day with the guy in the truck was a big wake-up call to me. That you think you're safe, you think everybody's liberal and everybody's good. Not true.
Thank you. Thank you again. Can we have a round of applause for Miss Anita Gail Jones in the building? Thank you. So, okay, she ain't about to leave. Calm down. So, at this time, we would like to invite members of the audience, both here and on Zoom, to ask questions of Miss Anita Gail Jones. Anyone? There.
Story? Oh, hi. Okay. And what? Yes. I was trying to decide, or I was asking how you decided when to flash back to the ancestral story and what parallels you saw between Malik and the more modern character stories, whether that's the joy or the hardships or going through adversity or anything else.
Thank you. The flashing back, it's just a really big process. I mean, I think of it as moving furniture around and seeing what works well and when to include the characters that you haven't heard from that much yet, because it's about a balance. One of the things I did was I gave each character a color. And my graphic design husband suggested one day that I go through the whole manuscript and actually give the sections for each character their color. Now, I did this, believe it or not. It was kind of interesting because then I shrank the whole manuscript to like 10%, and it looked like a tapestry. But I could also look and see, oh, Fletcher's color was brown, for example. There was a lot of brown, not too much gray. Gray was Malik, the ancestral story. So then I knew I had to do more for him because he was not in the story enough. And I would go in and add some things for Malik. In terms of what I was seeing with the ancestral story and the modern day, two characters, Bodhi and Malik, were front of mind for me. And I was interested in that arc between those two young men because when he was abducted, Malik was a young man and Bodhi was near Bodhi's age, 23. So I wanted to really be careful with that arc and really tend to it because it was a connection between, over time, 200 years, between these two men in the same family that never knew they were in the same family. So that arc was important.
Thank you. Anyone else have questions?
Hi. Which character did you have like the most fun with their voice? Like which character's point of view did you feel like was just you enjoyed writing through the most for whatever reason?
Before I do that, I want to thank you for working on our trailer. Production assistant, really great. Was that a great day? Same here. It was one of the best days of my life, truly. I don't like to pick favorites because I don't want to get in trouble with the rest of the folks, but Olga was one of my favorite people in the book. She helped me like she helped everybody else. And I loved Cricket. And she doesn't show up that much, but little Cricket. So both ends of the spectrum in terms of age, Olga and Cricket. I felt like Olga I was always learning from her how to deal with the other characters, what they needed. Because she was very much the glue in the family. And she became my glue, helping me paste this thing together and keep it moving. I also loved, I didn't love writing Bodhi, but he wore me out pretty much. But I understood what he was going through, and I really was happy to be able to bring it to the page in the way that it turned out. because drug addiction is something that families don't talk about enough. And he was able to teach us, to show us how it can be done.
Thank you. Would either one of you like to ask a question? We're actually going to check to see if there are any questions online at this time. No, not yet. All right. Dave has a question.
Well, of course, as a librarian, I was so moved when I can't remember the character's name with the drug problem. OD walked into a library for help, and they didn't have the book he wanted, and it just killed me. It's like, here's this young person with a drug problem. He comes to a library looking for help, and they don't have the book. I just wanted you to comment because I had to remind myself, David, this is not a real person.
Oh my goodness. Oh, Dave, I'm so sorry. No, that's Bodhi was, I love the fact that he was using the library in this way. My mother was a librarian. She was a school librarian for 39 years. So libraries are close to my heart. And book people are good people. I want to put that on a t-shirt. But in terms of him, I hadn't really thought of it quite that way, how traumatic it would be for the librarians. That I apologize to all librarians, but the fact that he saw the library as a place of safety was kind of a beautiful thing to me. So I'm glad that it resonated with you in that way, and maybe later on he'll find the book.
We have a question here.
Hi. Can you talk about some of your earliest memories of writing and how that shaped the author you are today?
I kept diaries, journal. Well, we didn't call them journals. We called them diaries. You remember those 5-year diaries that had a little lock, a tiny little key? And you had about that much space every year to write about what happened that day. And I would try to squeeze everything into that space. And then the rest of it's blank because I stopped writing in it. It's just like, why did you waste all that space? That was my first experience with writing, was keeping a diary. And I started in the 5th grade, I think. But I wish that I had written more about how I felt. I would write about what happened that day, which is interesting, several years later. But how did you feel about it? I really wanted to know that more. Wrote a lot of really bad poems, haikus. I loved those. And was drawing because I'm also a visual artist. And I would sit in the back of my sister's 5th grade class and draw pictures. This is before I could write. And her teacher, Mrs. Mary Louise Dubignon Clark, is her name. She became my 5th grade teacher eventually. Amazing educator. She allowed me, I don't even know why I was allowed to audit her class. I sat in the back of the room and drew pictures. I bring them up to her. She put 100% on it. And I would just feel great. I still have those pictures. And then when I learned to write, I added that to the mix of telling stories. And that's been happening ever since.
All right, thank you. We'll check in one more time for the folks online. Anybody on the Zoom room got a question? All right, then. I'm going to turn it back over to Miss Sarah Fry here, but can we just have another round of applause for Miss Anita Gail Jones in the building?
Thank you very much. This has been very, very special. Like I said, if you haven't read the book, we have copies, so please pick up one on your way out. You're going to love it. Also, we asked Miss Jones what her favorite dessert was. And in honor of the peach seed, well, she said peach cobbler with ice cream. So if you haven't gotten some peach cobbler, it looks like there's probably still some left there. Take some. There's pizza. And then we also have.
Yeah, Ms. Jones, I believe you brought some items from Georgia. Is that right? And we're raffling them off right now. So how many numbers should I call? One? Should I call a number? Okay, who didn't get a raffle ticket? Who needs a raffle ticket? Can you come on up, Unique, and pass out tickets? Maybe Patrona, you too. Pass these out to people who need a ticket. Most people got a ticket, but not everyone.
While the
I think
tickets
right
are coming
there.
around,
Who else didn't get a ticket? Shall I call out some numbers? Not yet, not yet. Okay.
while the tickets are coming around, you can also sign up for
Yeah.
her newsletter. She's got a book up on the front table here. And I want to also give a big round of applause for our library student workers.
Yay! Woohoo! And don't forget, Zach, we're so grateful to you for coming from Book Passage, the best bookstore in the world. So if you want to buy a copy of the book, it's right there. Or I'm going to call out 4 numbers: 392267. Yay! 392238. Darn it. Okay, how about this one? 392270. Woohoo, Unique. All right, couple left. Okay, what's the next one, Ms. Jones?
Old-fashioned peach butter.
Man, come on. That sounds like Georgia. That sounds like Georgia. Ready? 392233. Okay, no one? Next one. 392232. Oh! All right. And what's the last thing?
It's a sweet and tart mayhaw jelly.
What's mayhaw?
Mayhaw is it's like a wild cranberry that grows in the area, and this is my favorite stuff. It's great.
And that's the last one. And then we'll turn it over to Sarah for some closing words. Okay, here's the last number. Good luck, everyone. 392231. All right.
Yay. So thanks everyone again for coming out. It's great to see you all. Let's have one more round of applause for Ms. Jones. And a round of applause for our panelists, Nikisha Dyer, Malika Smith, and Paula DeCuna. And please pick up a book from the cart in the front of the room. We should have enough copies for everyone. And the list is circulating for the newsletter. Stay tuned for the second book.